think start recording. There we go. And so before we introduce our speaker, as always, I want to briefly highlight the organizers of this seminar, Cygnus Lab, our lab that stands for Social Intelligence for Generative, Networked, Adversarial, and Large-Scale Systems. So we are a relatively new but highly interdisciplinary team of 13 people here at USC ISI, led by Professor Luca Luccheri. Our core focus is on computational social intelligence, specifically studying the intersection of generative AI, networked systems, adversarial operations to address challenges like AI trustworthiness and influence campaigns. And we are very excited to host today's discussion on a topic that aligns directly with our research goals. So it is my big pleasure to welcome our speaker, Francesco Pierri. Francesco is an assistant professor in the data science lab at the Politecnico di Milano and also works at Indiana University's Observatory on Social Media. His research sits right at the intersection of AI and social science, focusing on trustworthy AI and digital ecosystem integrity. So today he'll be presenting his talk, Large Language Models in the Age of Misinformation. He'll walk us through two sides of generative AI revolution, covering the serious risks regarding disinformation, campaigns, and targeted attacks, but also the potential these tools have for positive societal impact and how we can build more trustworthy systems. So please join me in welcoming Francesco Pierri. On to you.
Thank you so much, David. So you you can hear me fine. All right. So, as David was saying, I'm an assistant professor at Politecnico Milano, but I'm originally from the south of Italy, from Salerno, in the Amalfi Coast. I don't know if you've ever been there. It's as nice as Marina del Rey, you could tell from the picture. So I hold a PhD in data analytics and decision sciences from Politecnico Milano as well. And I spent some time visiting the Indiana University, working at the Observatory on Social Media. And it's also nice to be back, even if remotely, at ISI, where I spent a few months back in 2022 visiting Emilio and Luca for a few months. And my research interests are in the broader computational social science domain, with a specific focus on the implications of generative AI for what concerns cyber social threats like online misinformation, and the goal of developing more responsible and safe AI technologies. So I have my iPad on the side, and I would love to have questions from you throughout the talk, but I understand that people usually like to ask questions at the end. But again, feel free to just ask questions, and I can stop and just try to answer them. So let's try to see this as a kind of a conversation, right? Okay, so let me just give you a very brief overview of the background I'm coming from. So during the past, I've been working a lot on understanding the dynamics of online misinformation by looking at the diffusion networks using network science approaches to detect automatically online misinformation, but also looking at the role of so-called super spreaders, so influential accounts that can promote and amplify misleading content. And when I was at Indiana, we carried out a study where we tried to link the prevalence of online misinformation to real-world impact, namely negative and detrimental effect of online misinformation shared on Twitter on the US vaccination campaign during the COVID-19 pandemic. And as you can guess, we found statistical association between more hesitant states and US counties associated with more prevalence of online misinformation. And during my time at ISI, we also looked the prevalence of fake and suspicious accounts during following the Russian invasion of Ukraine, finding some suspicious patterns of account creation, and we also try to understand whether platforms like Twitter and Facebook were timely in detecting and suspending this kind of accounts. More recently, I've been looking at the recommendation algorithms, for instance, in the meta targeted advertising algorithm when it comes to political advertising, finding biases in the German federal election. We've been also looking at inherent biases and emergent behavior of large language models in game theory settings. In another work, we've been looking at biases in a very famous black box classifier for online toxicity, which is Perspective API by Google. And we interestingly found that German language was negatively biased by this tool, and we could not understand why. German text was consistently labeled as more toxic than other languages. And very recently, we finished a study where we were able to develop a framework to predict engagement of online users on Reddit with the online conspiracy communities by means of psycholinguistic features with the years in advance. So this is just to give you an idea of the kind of work we've been doing. Let me now just set a bit the context of today's talk. So we're talking about misinformation. Over the years, especially in the computer science community, different researchers have oftentimes employed different words to refer to different problems. So there was kind of a terminology crisis. But recently, there has been some kind of consensus about what misinformation and disinformation indicate. So they are both about false content, with the difference being that misinformation is usually a broader domain of misleading and potentially harmful information that is shared unintentionally, whereas disinformation campaigns, and you may know better, since your group is very interested in this kind of issues, is more deliberate, right? But again, over the years, different researchers have employed a variety of terms like propaganda, clickbait, junk news, and of course, fake news to refer, all together to the same problem at once. And we've seen over the years this kind of, new signs of fake news, which has luckily, I think it's over now with the fake news fever, right? And of course, when we talk about misinformation, and I will use misinformation as a shorthand to refer to this umbrella of different problems with online information, we talk about social media because there is little quality control on the platforms, especially in recent times. Although you can argue that platforms do have moderation policies to try to somehow handle the kind of content that is being shared. There is research has shown that influential accounts can play a disproportionate role in amplifying this kind of harmful narratives, borrowing the terms from the epidemic jargon, and acting as super spreaders of misinformation. Other research has shown that echo chambers can make people more vulnerable and prone to fall into misinformation. Echo chambers are close-knit communities where individuals tend to be polarized and insulated from contrary perspectives, and this can make it worse for them when it comes to the spread of this kind of false and misleading content. And of course, the presence of inauthentic coordinated behavior, fake accounts, and social bots has been linked to the spread and amplification of misinformation. And last but not least, the very human cognitive biases make us all prone to different extents to believe into misinformation. Now, more recently, there have been, let's say, a few new concerns in the area. So we all notice that social media platforms have increasingly cutting access to relevant data in order to study this kind of issues, right? But the introduction of the Digital Services Act in Europe holds some promise for us researchers, especially when it comes to scraping, for instance, right? But more than that, the DSA allows researchers to ask even for non-public data in order to study so-called systemic risks. In correspondence of this, we witnessed less and less content moderation efforts by platforms, all shifting towards this new crowdsourced approach, like the community notes introduced by Twitter, right? Then X, and then Facebook and Instagram followed by removing and getting rid of the fact-checking activities. And of course, this corresponds to the rise of the novel generative AI technologies. So that is why most of platforms have been closed the access because these data have been used to train models, right, basically for free. And especially in the US, there are also some other concerns related to researchers being kind of targeted by specific political groups when it comes, to study and understand the spread and the role of online misinformation. And yeah, when you have several companies kind of coordinating together, this becomes quite a bigger concern than research only, right? So very briefly, let me talk about large language models very briefly. So we know that the world has become aware of these models with ChatGPT, but they were actually introduced many years before. So the first models were BERT and GPT using the transformer architecture developed by Google and OpenAI, respectively. We know that ChatGPT is the fastest platform to reach 100 million users with I think today estimated more than 800 million users active daily on the platform. These models have been trained on books, social media conversation, transcriptions, and so on and so forth. Over the years, we've seen a kind of Moore's law of parameters, with models becoming bigger and bigger, and at the same time more efficient and performing. At the same time, we had this nice shift from a few proprietary models to a variety, a deluge of open source models, which can be easily employed, adapt, and modified, right? So just like during the pandemic, when we had this infodemic of papers and information about the disease, the pandemic, the effects of the disease, how to counter it, and so on and so forth, with large language models over the last couple of years, we've seen a similar phenomenon in the research literature with, hundreds, if not thousands of papers being published every week or every day. And it's very hard to understand, which contributions are actually valuable. And recently we've been we've taken a look at the Hugging Face, which is one of the most popular open source repositories of LLM related resources, to understand, how often developers of models and datasets were providing information that is useful for various stakeholders, right? To understand, what kind of model is more suitable for a specific task, by looking at attributes like whether the model has been fine-tuned, what is the architecture, or even, the carbon emissions of the models. And we've been observing that, on average, only 30% of all this important information is available. And you can guess why. In many cases, it's important for the developers not to disclose too much information about how the models were constructed, right? And this holds also for most popular models. So even them, they are not so transparent. Okay, now getting to the actual topic of today's talk. So when we think about risks and threats of large language models and generative AI in general, we immediately think about sophisticated deep fakes that would flood social media platforms. We've seen a few cases, where notable figures were weaponizing deep fakes for kind of manipulating online conversations, but mostly what the average user experiences on a regular basis is the so-called AI slop, which is, very cheap fakes. And, the Shrimp Jesus series is the most famous one, right, to define AI slop. So we're still not witnessing, the massive disinformation campaigns that many were calling for. Although I will mention a recent event related to Claude in the next few slides. But more in general, the main problem of large language models, we can agree that that are factuality challenges. So the fact that these models tend to generate realistic, yet in many cases incorrect output, right? And research is showing more and more that these chatbots are much more persuasive than humans, and this can be easily deployed at scale to manipulate online individuals, right? And on a different note, the very interactions with the chatbots can cause psychological harm and very violent outcomes in the real world. Now, I recently encountered this nice paper. So we're all aware that these days the main approach to ensure that the model behaves, let's say, properly is to is most likely to have a much bigger prompt that tries to capture, all the potentially harmful behaviors and interactions between a user and the chatbot. There is this paper, I think it's still a preprint, or maybe it has been published at the conference eventually. I haven't checked recently, where basically the authors show that if you fine-tune a model with as few as hundreds instances of software code which is vulnerable, then let's say the unsafe behavior has a spillover effect on other kind of interactions with the chatbot. So the chatbot, let's say, becomes free of its previous safeguards. And this is just like a small example of how much work there is still to do when it comes to have a robust chatbot, right? So what we are really seeing, at least in my opinion, that these models are very unstable and still unsafe. And then on a different note, and this is something that is becoming more and more relevant recent times, is the extent to which generative AI can be employed for carrying out scientific misconduct. So there was a paper published last year where these authors created a fictitious Google Scholar profile. They posted a few fake papers on preprint servers, and then these authors started attracting real-world citations, right? To show that the Google Scholar can be manipulated very easily. And of course, we knew this already, but if you think about it, like Archive recently announced that they're not accepting any more review and survey articles, because they are so easy to create with a chatbot that you can easily inflate your citations by flooding these preprint servers with survey papers, right? And then, you are probably all aware of a few researchers hiding prompts for AI reviewers in their paper, with invisible color. And this is because I'm sure that everybody here has experienced at least once, a review generated by some chatbot. And in some cases, they even left the prompt inside the review, so that was not so nice. And of course, mentioning the fact that these models have been trained on real-world conversation, they encode a lot of. They are good because they encode and they can mimic and reproduce human behavior, right? And these training data sets are still being pre-processed and evaluated, but they are not perfectly curated. So the simple fact that they contain a lot of internet conversations results in so-called social biases, right? So the models reflect a different treatment or outcome between social groups, and they not only reflect these biases, but they can amplify them when people interact with chatbots, right? Touching upon some of our work on Chinese large language models, we recently, over the last couple of years, we've been looking at probing, harmful behavior in a variety of Chinese models by using different approaches, starting from, the traditional approaches to elicit some auto-completion in models, or even, and in particular, we prompted Chinese models to autocomplete sentences about Chinese social groups to understand, how often they would associate some social groups with negative words and negative concepts, in order to link this to some kind of stereotypical behavior. And we also extended this to, just generating text So not only auto-completing with some templates, but asking the models to generate some text about hundreds of different social groups from Chinese society, and playing a bit, with different personas to see if the model could be steered towards more or less negative behavior. And we observed that in many cases, these models refuse to say anything about social groups, especially when they understand that the topic might be sensitive, but they're still not 100% safe, right? And we also looked at so-called in-group solidarity and out-group hostility patterns from social identity theory, finding that these models tend to be more negative when they refer to some different groups, and tend to be more positive when they are referring to a collective group with the so-called in-group solidarity. Now, I will go through, let's say, some kind of milestone paper over the last 2 years, more related to misinformation and disinformation. So so just a few months after ChatGPT was launched in November 2022, so I think mid 2023, there was a paper published in Side Advances where these researchers found that GPT-3 could be very easily instructed to create disinformation, and they experimented with disinformation related to controversial topics like vaccines, 5G, COVID-19, right? And then they recruited participants and they asked them to distinguish between the fabricated tweets by GPT-3 and a real-world data set of organic tweets that were spreading either falsehood or sharing some true information. And they found that the tweets created by GPT-3 were more convincing, and people were more likely to so that they were failing at distinguishing the synthetic tweets, and at the same time they were getting more convinced into misinformation when it came to the tweets generated by GPT-3. And fast forward to this year, there was a paper published in PLOS ONE where researchers from the Oxford Internet Institute experimented with a dozen different large language models to construct and generate some more sophisticated disinformation messages related to the UK elections. And they found that in many cases, actually most of the cases, the models were compliant with the requests of the researchers. So they could be forced to generate disinformation messages. So this is just to show that still these models have no safeguards when it comes to generate and weaponize their output, right? And then, of course, a couple of weeks ago, there was this news of Claude code being used by some hackers linked probably to China, although I don't think it's for sure. And so Claude found out that they were using in an agentic framework. Anthropic found out that they were using Claude in an agentic framework to perform cyber hacking at scale, right? And this is just one of the campaigns that they actually disclose to the public. So I'm very worried of what might be happening behind the curtains. But then let's say on the other side of this battle against misinformation, researchers immediately also tried to use GPT to perform automatic fact checking, right? So they used this agentic framework that at the time was kind of groundbreaking, the React framework, where basically you could ask the model to decide which actions to take and then perform it on behalf of the model, like searching on Google. And these researchers from University of Zurich tested the performance of GPT-4 and GPT 3.5 on a data set of fact-checked claims in different languages on a time span of over, I think, 10 years. And they found that the model were quite accurate on average. So they were reaching performance up to 70 or 80%, which is still not 100%, but yet promising, especially if you think about some human in the loop framework, right? And they also found out that the models were more accurate when the claims were false, and that the performance was varying depending on the language, right? And this is most likely due to both the training data of the model, but also the kind of information that you can find on Google, right? Especially if you think about low resource languages. So despite this, like, let's say, promising performance by GPT, in another study, and this is by colleagues at Indiana University, published on PNAS, they were interested in understanding what could be the causal effects of having access to this kind of fact checks by GPT in a kind of real world setting where people have to understand whether a news headline is true or false, right? So they had these participants being treated with access in an optional or forced way to some fact checks by GPT. And then they asked them about, whether they were actually believing or not into the headlines that they had just fact checked. And they found out that whenever a true headline was incorrectly labeled by ChatGPT, people were less likely to believe it. And on the other hand, whenever a false headline was labeled as true or uncertain by GPT, people were more likely to believe in it. So you can see that there is a kind of a backlash effect of having access to a GPT-based fact checking. But then what everybody's talking about in the last year is using retrieval augmented generation to solve the problem of fact checking, because RAG can basically allow a model also to cite some references that support the answer to a specific query, right? So what it really is an augmented prompt where you retrieve some documents, some context that should contain the answer to your query. You put it into the prompt, and then you ask the model to answer the original query based on the text that has been retrieved. So the retrieval is the most important aspect of RAG systems, right? And really, what it looks like, at least to me, this is my very humble opinion, is that it's really an engineering task, and there is a lot of trial and error. So there is no one size fits all solution, and each different setting needs its own RAG pipeline. But still, what we witness now whenever we interact with the chatbot is some kind of RAG, right? So maybe the AI overview on Google, or the actual interaction with ChatGPT. And this is because large language models are basically going to replace the traditional search engines. And people are more and more asking directly chatbots for information, right? Without being aware of the difference between trying to search for information from some structured knowledge to ask a model to just predict, a sequence of words that should answer a query. And there is a nice perspective published in SIGIR this year, where researchers state out a few challenges for different stakeholders. So for content creators, they claim they say that there are challenges in terms of copyright of their content and lack of compensation, but also problems for the leakage of personal information when you rely on a large language model. There are also challenges for end users, because people are exhibiting this kind of over-reliance behavior, and this might lead to intellectual impoverishment, as well as questions about whether the output of a chatbot has actually some copyright issues or not. But most importantly, the challenges are for model providers, right? Because there will be liability issues on the output generated by this model. We've seen this with recent event news of suicides due to interaction and conversations with ChatGPT, but also broader issues related to the security, the poisoning effects, the poisoning attacks, and the collapse of these models as they will be trained more and more on generated text, right? So the zero internet hypothesis, basically. And nevertheless, OpenAI has introduced its browser, Atlas, and Perplexity has followed with Comet. I don't know if Google is going to replace its search engine in the end, or if it's still going to rely, on the hybrid RAG system with Gemini interacting with the traditional Google search engine. So we've been playing a bit with this again in the Chinese setting. And we've been looking at, so we constructed a data set of queries done by real world Chinese users. And we divided them in, so factual questions being done by Chinese users on a Chinese search engine called Sogo. And we took all the questions that could be answered with a simple yes or no. So it was easier to evaluate the performance in a fact-checking setting. And we evaluated these three different approaches. So the traditional search engine results, LLMs in zero shot, and the AI overview of Baidu, which is the equivalent of Google in China. So first of all, most of the queries in our data set are related to health topics. And we found out that the systems on average are not very accurate. So the average is around 60%, with the most performing systems having performance up to 70 or 75% accuracy. And we also try to estimate the potential real-world exposure of people to this kind of misinformation by linking this query to what is called the Baidu index, which is a sort of a counterpart of Google Trends, but for Baidu searches, where basically you can link the prevalence of different queries to different Chinese provinces and regions. And the brighter colors here indicate where this is related to the health topics. So these are the areas where those queries were made the most. And they're also correlated, obviously, with larger volumes. So we cannot causally claim that, people are exposed on average 30% of the time to misinformation. But this is our, let's say, best effort to try to understand what might be happening in the real world when users rely for health-related queries on, for instance, Baidu AI overview. Last but not least, I will mention the problem of online conspiracy theories. So we've been looking at we've been using large language models as a moderation tool. So we've been trying to estimate the prevalence of conspiracy videos on TikTok using TikTok KPI and focusing on US data. So by using a combination of hashtag-based searches and some co-occurrence matrices, we estimated a lower bound for the prevalence of conspiracy videos to about 0.1%, which is still a lot of videos being posted every day. And we started from a data set of conspiracy theories and documents related to conspiracy theories, which is called Loco Corpus. And we focus on the most famous conspiracy theories, like, the September 11, Illuminati, the reptilians, and, the very outright conspiracy theories. And then we labeled a small sample of videos manually as containing, as supporting this kind of conspiracy theories. And we tested the performance of large language models on the transcriptions of these videos, finding that compared to a fine-tuned baseline like Roberta, they are not so better. And most models are very precise when it comes to identify conspiracy theories, but they also have a very low recall, while Roberta by construction is much more stable and balanced. And so we use the transcription only of videos because we were using text-based LLMs. We then extended this with bigger models, but also with a video LLM like Video Llama, finding very similar performance. In another work on YouTube, we also experimented with video LLMs, and it doesn't look like they are super accurate at detecting this kind of content. Although maybe the newer Gemini might be much better, they tell me. we are using it for a different experiment where we try to understand what's going on in a video, and the model seems to be very good at describing what's happening. So maybe asking it to say whether a model is supporting or spreading some conspiracy theory might be more effective.
Is this
As you
only
can see,
video or video plus audio or transcript?
so this is no, so this is only transcriptions for the text-based LLMs. So there is no images, right? So only the
Hmm.
transcription of the audio. The problem with conspiracy videos is that in many cases they have this overlay text, or you just have a voice talking about
Hmm.
some images which are not really, that are sometimes, that are most time oftentimes AI generated, by the way. So there are so many AI generated videos that are about conspiracy theories. For the video model, the problem of Video Llama is that it doesn't take the audio, so we just give it the description of the frames. Basically, this is what Video Llama does, which is, by the way, it's not developed by Llama, so it's an adaptation of Llama. But this is, let's say, this is already, so this is ACL 2025, but it's already old, right? So we already need to test new model. And I think there is at least one paper out that tried GPT 4.5 on YouTube videos, but they were not reporting super high perform, like 75, 80% prediction, which is still, I think, not too bad, right? And then of course, talking about conspiracy theories, I must mention this other line of work that is being carried out at Cornell by David Rand, and the idea here is to use chatbots to reduce the belief in conspiracy theories. So testing the hypothesis of whether interactions with the chatbot can talk people out of conspiracy theories. And in the first work that has been published on Science last year, they found that even a 3-round dialogue between ChatGPT and conspiracy believers can reduce their beliefs by 20% in a durable manner. So this belief is reduced, and the effect stays there even after 2 months. And there are a few follow-up works, if you're interested, where they also test this on other controversial topics like climate change denialism, vaccine denials, and they find in all cases that the chatbot is very convincing at persuading people to actually shift in favor of vaccines, for instance. Especially in the case of I think they experiment with the parents, and they ask them, whether they are in favor or not of vaccinating their children. And then on a different yet related line of research, there are a few papers trying to study the persuasion capabilities of LLMs by testing whether So I didn't put in the slide because I didn't want to talk too much. There are a few papers testing whether bigger models are more persuasive than smaller models, and they found that there are diminishing returns. But of course, bigger models, so frontier models, are much more persuasive than the small ones. And then I will mention this very super recent paper that came out on Science, I think this week or last week, where there is these researchers. They put up a field experiment on Twitter. Sorry, I don't know why I put this is X. So they carried out an experiment on X by using an LLM-powered plugin to alter the feed of users. So they recruited some participants. They let them install a plugin in which an LLM changed the feed by re-ranking what they called AAPA content, anti-democratic, authoritarian and anti-democratic attitudes. Anyway, some polarizing content in a way. So they change the exposure of users to this kind of content. So they either reduce or increase it, and then they test with surveys what is the polarization of these individuals. And they of course found that during the experiment, a reduced exposure moves the users towards the other side of the political spectrum, so they become less polarized, and they have the opposite effect when they increase the exposure to this kind of content. And they also find changes in the emotions, self-reported emotions of these users. So more than the LLM thing here, I think what is interesting is that you don't need. So there was all this talking about independence by permission to carry out experiments on social media. So basically, only if you teamed up with the platforms, like in the Facebook 2020 election studies, you could carry out experiments like this. What this paper shows is that actually you don't really need to collaborate with a platform to carry out some field experiments that change, the user experience. So some takeaway messages. So there's still a lot of misinformation about LLMs. So I don't know in the US, but in Italy, it's really a minefield. I didn't really mention detecting generated content, but there is still a lot of work to do. So despite all these watermarks techniques that are being introduced by Google and OpenAI, I still see people that can easily bypass this kind of signatures in order to have generated content not being detected as such. When it comes to fact checking, the problem has not been solved yet, but AI seems to be working against conspiracy theories. So thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to take your questions and anyway engage in some discussion.
I can start. Thank you. Thank you, Francesco, for the amazing talk. I will start with a very quick comment about the TikTok conspiracy theory detection. It's always nice to see that you can get consistent findings across different methodologies and different papers. We recently found similar things when it comes to synthetic voiceovers and AI-generated speech on TikTok, which is something you said you have found on conspiracy videos. Do you have a measure of the prevalence of AI-generated voiceover or AI-generated content on AI-generated content promoting conspiracy theories, which is a subset probably of your lower bound?
So we just did some qualitative analysis. So we did the error analysis. So we wanted to understand. So one, let's say, interesting thing is that in many cases, some religious videos were being incorrectly labeled as conspiracy theories by the models. And on the other end, we noticed this generated like you could immediately, even from the thumbnail, you could tell, okay, this is a generated video, right? From a human perspective. But we didn't focus on this kind of angle. Also because I don't know if you know any like good methodologies or classifiers to detect generated content that are reliable.
Like speech?
Yeah, like videos.
AI-generated videos, not AI-generated speech.
No, just and that's another problem, right? Because even like with AI-generated voice, you can immediately tell it's generated if you listen you listen to a couple of seconds. I don't know, to be honest, I'm a bit I'm a bit pessimistic about having a reliable tool that can detect this kind of content. So we didn't investigate that, but I think that's surely like one way to go. Like there is a specific research question there, so it would be interesting to see. But that relates to generated content in general, right? How it's floating. So from a text-based perspective, it seems like there are some tools they say that are more accurate. Although I would argue that it's easier to see if a video is generated than a text, right? But they have all these entropy-based or statistically based heuristics to detect generated content in text as well. Maybe lucky for us, the video LLMs are still struggling. I think about Sora, I think you can still, at least on Instagram, if you see a video generated by Sora, you can tell it's Sora, right? And then there is this problem with sorry, I'm digressing, of platforms that have to label generated. So Meta announced that it would label AI generated content for its users, right? And I was reading some news recently. I cannot tell what was it, but like they're not good. They're not doing so good. Yeah, the newsletter by Alexios Manzarlis, Indicator. It's a Substack project where they do this kind of fact checking every week. It's kind of a Substack about misinformation. They do this small investigation, journalistic styles, right? And they were talking about the fact that Meta, I think they released some internal documents, and Meta is not doing much about labeling AI generated content. So yeah, I don't know in the US if you can, if you know these labels anywhere, but
No, not really. We investigated something on TikTok. Again, there were some videos labeled as AI generated, but there were many others that were not even shared by the same users or the same network of coordinated actors, for instance. Same videos or very similar videos with the same voiceovers, but one was labeled, the others were not. So
did you some kind of similarity based approach to cluster videos?
Yes, only those of these coordinated suspicious users. We used for the speech a spectrogram analysis, and you could see that all the videos with
Nice.
AI voiceovers were clustering together. Like you had different voiceovers, not always the same. But of course, you can have different clusters for each of those. So that was like a probably simplistic approach, but will lead us to differentiate videos that were AI generated or using an AI generated speech or voiceover versus the others.
But did you try to fine tune some model then?
No, we didn't. No, we didn't. We used to build video similarity. We used another tool, not the Video Llama. It's called Visal. I can share this with you. And it was quite helpful for us to, again, find coordinated networks of users sharing these kind of videos, but not for the same task that you're looking
Right, so
for.
it's embedding, and then you use some cosine similarity.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, but I guess that then if you do like snowball sampling from these accounts, you can reach other accounts that share maybe some different videos, but that are still generated.
Oh, yeah. Maybe. Yeah. Another quick question, and then I'll give the floor to somebody else. I see that there are already questions in the chat. I'm surprised by the fact that the video alone can get to similar performance to what you found with the transcript. Because that's why I was asking you, it's only the video, it's only the frames.
No, it's there is no audio. That's the problem with Video Llama.
But it's surprising that only the video can get to similar performance to the transcript.
To be honest with you, I think we could have done a better job, but these PhD students, you ask them 10 things and they do free. And then anyway, just joking. So yeah,
no, but it's promising. Like what my question is, not a question, but my comment maybe is if you combine video plus text, maybe you will get much better.
So this is what so I'm trying to recruit some students because Francesco got bored with this and wanted to do something different, right? So I'm trying to recruit some students to work more on the kind of machine learning aspect of it, like trying to build a more sophisticated classifier. Yeah, I think there is still a lot of work. So I wouldn't say these results are.
No, but
Yeah.
they're super interesting. Okay, thank you,
All right.
Francesco.
So Felix, thank you for the coin. John, do you think, okay, more or fewer people? So this is a $1 million question. Like, um, so conspiracy theories have been around for ages, like misinformation. So I don't think we can talk about numbers. We can, so like manipulating information has always been instrumental for powerful groups, right? So, and this is not a conspiracy theory, but you know, like extreme examples are, of course, totalitarian states like the Soviet Union, but you can argue that misinformation is being employed at all stages by many people in different domains, right? So I cannot give you like a specific answer to that. What changes these days is that you have uh, so the problem, I think the bigger problem right now comes from the chatbots, from the AI search engines, right? So there is even less intermediation. So before you had at least to read some websites on Google when you were searching for something. Right now, you have your answer directly, and the answer it's kind of a not completely deterministic. So we are relying on the performance of these models. So maybe most of the times they will be accurate, but then even if they are wrong, 10% of the time it's a big number, right? So there is this interconnection between over reliance and the factuality challenges of LLMs. I cannot say whether it's gonna. I'm like I would say it's gonna be worse, to be honest with you. But maybe like before, people were searching for information on social media, and even there was some kind of randomness. So more popular content was shown to them, and it might not be necessarily accurate. So I hope I answered at least partly your first question. Can you elaborate? So they first recruited the so I assume everybody can read the questions, right? So I don't need to say it out loud. Yeah, okay. So they recruited people from a representative sample of US citizens, and then they asked all of them whether they believed in some conspiracy theories, and then they retained only those they were claiming they were believing at least in one conspiracy theory. And they had them to write some statement saying, I believe in this conspiracy theory because blah, blah, blah. Okay. So there is a problem of finding this kind of extreme individuals like in a random sample. The question you are asking, and then they just prompt a GPT-4, which they call the bank bot, but it's simply GPT-4 prompted with, oh, you have to convince this person out of this conspiracy theory. They let them chat with each other. They debrief them, so they tell them they are talking to a bot. Okay. Although there is another study where they don't do this and they check whether, being disclosed or not, if there is a different effect, and they find the same effect. So it's really about what the model tells them, apparently, although I'm not super convinced, because I believe that when it comes to conspiracy theories, there is a problem of identity, right? So people identify with this kind of narratives. So when they know they are talking to a non-human being, they might be more open to discuss and change their mind. And in a way, they looked at the strategies that the GPT was using, and the factuality, like whenever it was using facts, they observed, but very qualitatively speaking, that it was more effective. And I don't know if they check these. There might be some self-selection bias as well, right? If you are willing to participate to a study, maybe you are more open to change your mind. Although they were not able to change opinion of everyone, right? Do you think the finding will hold even as Gen AI will become entirely indistinguishable and smarter? Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know if it's going to become indistinguishable anytime soon, to be honest with you. So a lot of people are talking about this bubble and this saturation of performance. So I think that the new wave, as Jan LeCun was saying, is so-called word models. So large language models cannot mimic human intelligence with text alone. But I think we will have different problems probably. I mean, yeah, two very hard questions. Yeah, I don't have a definite answer to that, but on the one hand, I'm very worried, especially, more practical aspects. Like, people are asking a chatbot, even like, so this is a fun fact. I was in Lisbon with some friends, and we were looking for some bakery, and instead of using Google Maps, one of us asked ChatGPT. So if to me it was crazy, like you're asking ChatGPT if there is a bakery open at 4 a.m. So this is a kind of a fun fact, but the thing is that people are relying more and more on this technology, and this scares me more than the human-like super performance of the models. Okay, Jeannie, thank you for the questions. Yes, empirical evidence that AI generated is more or less believable, harmful than human generated is only one form. So I don't think. So maybe David Rand has a paper on this because they I don't know how they got it into IRB. They might. I think they experimented with the chatbot trying to convince people into conspiracy theories, but I'm not 100% sure because to me this sounds a bit unethical. Because what I was gonna say is that you cannot run such an experiment, right? Where you run a misinformation or a disinformation campaign to see the effects, or at least you can do it, but then you cannot publish in a paper. I agree that misinformation is not like so it's a spectrum, or in general, like information is a spectrum, right? So whatever convinces somebody doesn't necessarily convince somebody else, and also the degree of truthfulness is not a binary thing, right? So I agree that it might depend on the individuals, right? But to like the short answer would be that I haven't seen any paper claiming some universal patterns of like LLM generated misinformation is more persuading. Still, there is these papers that I was mentioning by people at Oxford Internet Institute, where they test the persuasion capabilities of LLMs, but they don't use misinformation, right? Because they cannot do that. So I hope that answered your question.
Okay, we are at time right now. So thank you so much, Francesco, for a truly insightful and timely presentation. And also thank you for the audience too for joining us and for your engaging questions. We encourage everyone to follow the work of Francesco and also our lab as we continue to host these important discussions, especially in the age of Gen AI and everything else.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the invite. I hope to see you around soon, maybe at ICWSM next year. 90%, I'll be there. If you swing by Milan, let me know.
Likewise,
Or if you want to visit us in Milan, let me know.
All right.
Thank you,
Thanks, everyone.
Francesco. Have a good
All
night.
right, thank you. Bye bye. Ciao.